Sanctions. It's how countries wage an economic war. But how did this idea come about? And how effective are they? It's a story that dates back to ancient Greece. A different time, a different politics, but the same result. A statesman from Athens, Pericles, was the first to impose sanctions. All city-states that refused to ally with Athens were placed under a trade embargo. Did it help? Not really. The Spartans went on to beat the Athenian alliance. So the first economic sanction in human history ended in failure. And this set the trend for what was to come. Here's the first thing that you need to know about sanctions. They can only be imposed from a position of power, which is why it is America's favorite tool. The US has imposed sanctions on more than a dozen countries. The major ones are Iran, Venezuela, China, and North Korea. Sanctions take different forms: arms embargoes, asset freezes, denial of visas, cutting off trade and credit lines. The idea is to cripple a country financially. US sanctions on China are not new. They're as old as the People's Republic itself. From 1949 to 1972, China was under American sanctions. It was typical Cold War era politics. They were lifted in 1972 ahead of the open door policy. But Chinese politics did not change. Democracy and human rights continued to be curbed. It reached a tipping point in 1989 during the Tiananmen Square massacre. American sanctions returned. But unlike the last century, economic warfare is not unilateral anymore. China now has the power to respond, at least on paper. A case in point is Hong Kong. In August last year, the US sanctioned Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong. Beijing responded with targeted action on 11 Americans, and this list included Republican Senators Marco Rubio, Tom Cotton, and Ted Cruz. But here's the problem. Both actions were toothless. Carrie Lam does not have assets in America, and these US senators do not have interests in China. So the sanctions were symbolic with no economic impact. And herein lies the problem with sanctioning leaders. Make no mistake, autocrats double up as businessmen. They have major economic interests, but they rarely extend their business interests overseas for these sanctions to make a dent. Think back to the Gulf War. The Bush White House sanctioned Saddam Hussein for 6 months. No effect. In the end, it took a major military offensive. A present-day example is Iran. Donald Trump followed the policy of maximum pressure, crippling sanctions that throttled the Iranian economy. What happened? Tehran continues to expand its nuclear arsenal. Last week, they revealed an entire city of missiles. So what is the lesson here? Sanctions have unintended effects. They help galvanize public opinion. For example, American sanctions are rallying calls in Iran and North Korea. They bring the people together against a common enemy, in this case, the United States. Sanctions only work in a collective. It cannot be a unilateral campaign, which is why the latest campaign against China is important. The US and its European partners have sanctioned China. The walls are closing in from all sides. So what are China's options here? Beijing will most likely deepen ties with existing allies, North Korea, Russia, Pakistan, and Turkey, to name a few. The fact is, sanctions are a pinch, not a purge. There is a limit to what government action can achieve. But what about private businesses? It's a globalized world. Companies have interests all over the world, and this could be a game changer in economic warfare. 217 Chinese companies, 217, are listed in American exchanges. For dozens more, the American market is a money churner. Now think of the inverse. American companies look to China for raw materials, they operate factories there, and ignore abuses endured by the workers. So here is the question. Can Apple be docked for making iPhones in China? Can Tesla be pulled up for making cars in China? The answer is yes, Joe Biden could do it. But the companies will be livid. Years of capitalism has taught American firms to put profits over national interest. Donald Trump proposed taxes on American firms, shifting away from the country, and he was criticized for trying to stage manage the economy. But for Chinese firms, it is different. Most of them are owned, at least in part, by the government. So national interest is paramount, even at the cost of losses. The future of economic warfare will be decided by private companies. They can take away jobs, funding and factories from rival nations. But will they indulge home governments? And if they don't, can governments force their hand? In the pursuit of tackling autocracy, will this not count as state hegemony? WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.